Two Wood for a Wheat is a board game podcast. We review and criticize board games, diving deep into the strategies and mechanisms that make them great or make them forgettable. We're focused and ready to pod.
Ready to pod. Ready to talk about Sabika, the new heavyweight Euro game from Herman Milan, designer of Bitoku, and what you call...
Games that should have been an email. Games that are heavy games that could have easily, with a few changes, been medium weight games.
I like to simply use the title overcomplicated games because I'm going to drag into this topic games that are not heavy games, but that are too complicated for what they are.
Well, it's a good thing that I control the episode title.
And the editing process, so you'll just cut out all my examples.
Exactly. I will craft my desired podcast. So, good morning. My name is Pat Flannery.
I'm Tony Faber.
And we are Two Wood for a Wheat. So, excited to talk about our topic, but first off, how are you doing?
Besides being a bit sleepy and my chest hurting from unwisely participating in CrossFit, gymnastic rings are not something an old out-of-shape man should really be doing. So,
yeah, I tend to imagine like the fittest of fit people with a perfect, triangular body going up on those things and holding themselves. And anybody else, I imagine it being an extremely painful experience.
There's some dangers to certain muscle groups. So I'm sort of crafting my exit email from CrossFit.
Poor man. I think of CrossFit as a young man's game, but you are proving the exception to the rule.
No, I'm proving that is exactly accurate. Is what I'm proving. And, the base exercise is something like doing tons of squats. That's something I can and should be doing. It's just these extraneous things that I don't fully understand, like gymnastic rings when they pull in, that I really should not be participating in.
Yeah, I mean, the human body was designed to hang off of gymnastic rings in a perfect T and to lift giant tires. That's what the human body was made for.
Yeah. Anyway, so besides being a little bit of pain, I'm doing okay. My wife is kindly preparing a birthday party for me, which is going to happen about an hour after this episode ends.
1, 2, 3. Happy birthday
to
please. You.
I almost didn't say
Happy
it, but I wanted to honestly share my life with the
Happy
listeners.
Birthday, dear Tony. Happy birthday to you.
You're making me regret my honesty.
Oh, come on. Half the audience sang along with me, didn't you? Didn't you?
So,
how are you celebrating your birthday, Tony?
Well, there's going to be some Just One being played, but that's not unlike every episode where I briefly mention Just One.
Correct.
But among gamers, I hope to get off this episode and immediately watch a how to play of Shake. Is it Shake My City? Shake Your City?
Shake Our City, Tony.
Shake Our City.
It's ours, and we love it, and we care for our city. We shake it.
Is it our city?
Like a beautiful baby. No, it's Shake That City.
Shake That City. Dumb title aside, it's this game we've been anticipating, which looks like a cool combination of dexterity and spatial puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's a new game from AEG, and just showed up in the mail a day or so ago.
I can confirm that mine also arrived, and I can also confirm that the box with the plunger that distributes cubes, it works well and makes the game that much more satisfying. I think the game is pretty unique. I got a solo play in. It seems very replayable. Excited to review it. And it's unique that you can't rotate the color and the color patterns to your liking. You just have to go with whatever orientation they're in. I like how restrictive this game is.
Well, I can't wait, and I'm going to rush to put it all together as soon as this is over while my wife screams at me for not helping with the party.
Hey, it's your birthday. You can shake if you want to.
This is my party, right?
Exactly.
But instead of raking the bamboo out of the backyard, never get bamboo in your backyard.
Yeah, and then you get panda infestations. They're very hard to clear out. And protected species,
Bamboo in your swimming pool, not good.
Right. Then you have to make trade treaties with China. It's a whole thing. You don't want to do bamboo in the backyard.
No, especially, around your birthday when you've got a lot of other things to do. So, Pat, what games have you been playing this week?
At least one play of a game that I hear you might get out on the table for your birthday. Granted, you're able to learn it. That's War of the Ring, the card game. Our nerdy couple friends asked for a team-based game, and I said, I have no team-based games. Until, wait, I do. This is the only one that I own. This is a team-based Lord of the Rings themed card game designed by the same individual who, Ian McRody, who designed General Quartermaster, classic war game, where one player plays the Shadow Forces, made up of Mordor and Isengard, the Haradrim, and monsters, while the other players play the Free People, made up of hobbits, elves, dwarves, the Rohirrim, and the Númenóreans. But the decks, both the Shadow decks and then the Free People's decks, are split across the two teammates who have to openly communicate and cooperate with their decks and their strategy to, well, win the game. And what you're doing is you're battling across real battlefields that take place inside of the stories. And then you're also fighting across story beat moments where you're basically taking the ring path of the Fellowship from, Low Hobbiton all the way to Mordor and fighting across these story beat moments. And each, both the battlefields as well as story moments have their own set of attack and defense resources. Now, the unique thing about this game is that whenever you put a card into play, you have to discard another card. So there's this constant tension of this card is available to me for use, and this card is fuel to fuel my efforts. And that is fine and great if you're the Shadow Forces, where you have a hand of 4 cards. But it's Bupkis if you're the allies, Free People, where you have a hand of 3 cards, and you must do very clever things in order to get more cards in order to play more than 1 card per round. So knowing the story of the Lord of the Rings, I gotta say, is absolutely an advantage, and it was a huge advantage for me during this game. And that's a compliment. This game is very thematic. It's very good implied theming. So, for example, the hobbits, totally overpowered. Individually, okay. I mean, they can play kind of anywhere inside of the story beats, but oh my gosh, they are so tricksy. They're such tricksy little hobbitses because they have items like the Phial of Galadriel that can be played on a hobbit that demand this huge response of a huge investment of resources from the shadow players to counteract. But usually, these items, they're very special. They require that the 2 Free People players coordinate openly, since the hobbits are in one deck, and many of their items are in the other player's deck. So they have to openly communicate, and the shadow people can hear them. So much like the story of trying to very sneakily get into Mordor, not fly the eagles directly into the mountain because it's an open conflict, and instead sneak into Mordor and distract. It is very much like the Free People in the real story, trying not to be explicit about their quest to bring the ring to Mordor, and you're trying to communicate with your teammate as a Free People without over-communicating to the point where the Mordor people, where the Shadow Forces can muster against you.
See, this is interesting to me. Indulge me for a moment.
Yeah.
This sounds a bit like the issues one might have in playing the classic card game Bridge, the classic 2v2 card game, in that signaling could be a thing. You know what I mean? You could sort of signal or use code to indicate what things you have that perhaps the dark player powers won't pick up on. This is, of course, illegal in Bridge.
Right. I could definitely see it. I mean, there's explicit rules inside of the rulebook that say you can't show the cards to any other player, but you can communicate what they do. So I imagine you could come up with some sort of, secret elvish language that you speak, where you're able to communicate to the other player and not have the other team understand. And the fact is, you do play through inevitably the whole deck. You do go through the whole deck, and you're going to get to know the deck, and you're going to replay cards. So yes, absolutely. I think that there could be certain indulgences, Bridge style, and this game has replay value from that perspective. I think so.
It sounds like you play the Dark Power player.
Yeah, it felt good. And the theming is great because I knew that the Haradrim, who are the Southron people, they come in later in the story, right? They come in with the Oliphants. They come in, during the great attack against Minas Tirith, the White City, and that the Fellowship heroes, they're all there. You've got Aragorn, you've got Gimli, you've got Legolas, you've got Gandalf the White. So I saved up a bunch of Haradrim cards, and I put them into my reserve, and then I played them after the Free Peoples had basically exhausted all of their heroes, and I played them onto a Haradrim battlefield. And then I used some of these Haradrim who have a special reserve ability to pull other Haradrim battlefields out that had already been won by the Free People players. I pulled it out of their victory pile, and then I replayed them unopposed and won those victories. And people said, okay, I'm done. This is, 9th round, or 8 out of 9 rounds, and you just did that. Okay, we're calling it. So there's great moments like that. Very devious, very bad guy kind of things. And I'm excited to try this again, see the synergies between the decks, the strengths and weaknesses of the factions, the idiosyncrasies like I just described as far as interactions between decks, as well as intricacies of being a really bad guy. And trying the 2-player version and trying out new tricksy strategies. That is War of the Ring, the card game.
Nice. Well, I've just been playing some of the same my same favorites on Board Game Arena, such as It's a Wonderful World, Bunny Kingdom, and A Feast for Odin. I really like Bunny Kingdom, and I have an issue with how it plays out playing it a lot on Board Game Arena. One thing is I don't like the two-player implementation, which has this big memory element, because in the two-player implementation, it's a drafting game, but there's this hate drafting built into it, where you pick one card and kill one card, and then go back and forth. Now, the game nicely tracks which cards you've killed, but you have to remember which cards you've passed and that your opponent doesn't draft and don't come back to you. You basically have to keep this running tally in your head of all the cards that have been killed, or else you'll try to build up presence on a map in an area that's totally dry where your opponent has killed all these cards. So it's way more intense a memory element than most drafting games. So
Do not play drafting games asynchronously. No, no, no.
yeah, if you play this async, by the way, you'll never remember any of that, right?
Forget it.
So forget about it, right? So I try to play like 3-player games. The issue I've had there is I'm fairly high ranked on Board Game Arena and Bunny Kingdom, is that I'll get 2 players, not as highly ranked, one of whom will decide, because I'm highly ranked, that I need to be hate drafted extensively. Now, this is going to sound like a complaint. It kind of is, but it's kind of a interesting human phenomenon. So basically what often happens is I have one player kamikazeing on me the whole game, the other player just doing their game, and that player wins because I've been hampered, and the player kamikazeing me comes in way last because their whole game was about trying to stop me because they thought stopping the higher-ranked player was the best strategy.
Sometimes that's more satisfying than winning.
Right. And it makes you have to play weird because you have to sort of anticipate being ganged up on in the game, which is kind of, has you draft weird. So I asked my friend Jordan, who's really good at Bunny Kingdom, how he avoids this, and he basically says he just doesn't play the board much early and only drafts parchments, which is a very viable strategy, just drafting the endgame cards and not sort of the board cards. It's just much more boring to play that way because the board play is the most interesting part as opposed to just collecting cards that give you points, right? So,
although it can be the most crushing
although
it can be the most crushing to your opponents when they say, wow, I've got so much board presence, this is great. And then you slam out about 100 points at the end of the game.
Or a lot more. So yeah, I just don't love, like, I've been sort of ganged up on in my last 8 games, and you can't anticipate how to play on the board when you do that. So yeah, I may have to adopt a much more parchments heavy strategy, but it's just duller to play that way.
Well, I hope you get some in-person play soon of Bunny Kingdom. Well, I have been doing a good amount of Board Game Arena play, specifically Ark Nova. This is my solo game with breakfast to wake my brain up. The nice little synergies, the tiny puzzles that I have to solve in order to sequence things, in order to ensure that I play the cards correctly before the end of the round and my cards get halved. It is now officially on my list of comfort food games, as discussed 8 months back on episode 99, our comfort food game episode. Ark Nova is a wonderful comfort food game. I gotta say, it's right up there with Race for the Galaxy.
Wow, and this would not obviously be a comfort food game in person. This is a comfort food game on Board Game Arena, handling a lot of things for you, allowing you to play a turn whenever you want to, asynchronously.
Yes. And the small puzzles that I have to solve in between each round. It's nice to have something sliced and diced. It's like, instead of eating an entire fish, I have salmon bite-sized portions, like a good bit of sushi. I have a few more games of Woodcraft the dice carving and dual drafting action selection game from Vladimir Suhi. That was my #1 game of 2022. The bloom is a little off the rose somewhat. And not because it's a bad game, Tony, but because I can't find anyone good enough to play with. I am undefeated after a dozen plays, and just nobody can compete. So come at me, bro. I'm waiting. I want a good competitive game of Woodcraft. Played some Kites, the real-time game about playing colors of cards to flip matching colors of sand timers to run through an entire deck before time runs out. And my suspicion about playing with kids was correct. It is great for kids. They are yelling, red, red, play red, at each other. That was a highlight of my week. The one thing is they do love it, but it's a little hard for kids to remember to draw up after each card played. So I just had one kid sequencing cards one after the other, then drawing 5 up. No, you need options. Finally, Tony, got another round of Frosthaven in. I had retired some characters, and now I have for anybody who is worried about Frosthaven spoilers, just skip this section and go right to our feature review of Sabika. But 3, 2, 1. I unlocked the Hive and the Drill, which are two unfettered robots that I am playing. I'm a fully robotic team. The Hive is basically like the Megazord, Power Rangers Megazord, which is made up of 5 different summons. And you can select an attribute of one of those summons and have that be your base attribute, okay? While you play 2 or 3 other summons on the map. And you can switch your summon so that you become one of the other summons. So you might have a summon who is basically a shield, like a living, walking shield, while you have, and you become that. And you have a +2 shield for every first attack on the board. While you have another summon on the map, which is basically a tank, and another summon, which is basically walks as far as possible and attacks the furthest enemy and jumps over everything, okay? And in a round, you may be that shield, right? Get hit, block that attack, and then you will switch into the position of that faraway walking summon, and you will make an attack there, and then you will switch again to the tank summon, and you will be in position as a tank summon and have that attribute, and you will launch out a mega attack there, and then there's a negative attribute. Could be that you're the tank summon. Yes, you get higher output, but then you get damaged if you are ever at the end of your round that tank summon, right? So it's very interesting. You can hop around the map, basically teleport, have these different attributes. Oh, it's so funky to play. The other one is a steam-generated robot. It's basically if you took, the electric car or a steam-powered car, turn it into like a living, breathing robot, right? And it has different levels of pressure, 4 different grades, and the attacks change depending on how much pressure it has, which is fun. It's a lot simpler than the Hive. But man, they are fun to play. I'm excited to get it back to the table.
The Hive looked interesting to me. I opened it up, and I couldn't quite wrap my head around it, so I never played it.
It took me about, I'd say, 3 weeks to actually have it out on my table and think about playing it and sit down and play it. And man, it's good. I recommend it.
Okie doke. Well, let's jump into our feature game this week. Again, Sabika from Herman Milan, designer of Bitoku. This is their second design. This is Sabika from Ludonova Games, and this is a heavy Euro game. And to paraphrase one other reviewer I heard talking about this game, it is the Euroiest Euro that you will see Euro this year.
It's like if you built a mech suit out of beige.
It's here. The theme of this game is you're trading goods in the Mediterranean. That is not a joke. That's actually what you're doing.
While building the Alhambra.
You're building the Alhambra, which has been done before, but it at least is a little less generic than trading goods.
What's that game again? Something like Alhambra? Yep.
There is a game called Alhambra. Well, you're building the Alhambra. What you're doing is you are building buildings. You are inscribing poems into this buildings, which thematically I like quite a bit, actually. And you are trading with, yes, various cities in the Mediterranean. Those are the main things you're doing, right? Building buildings. Oh, you're expanding your storehouses so you have more room to keep goods.
That's right.
To spend on building these buildings,
right,
and inscribing these poems.
Yeah.
And mechanically how this works is you are moving 4 workers around 3 rondels over 5 rounds. And there are 3 rondels that are in little circles around each other in the middle of the board. And 2 of your workers are tromping around the construction rondel, where they will get resources and money and build those constructions, those buildings. One of your workers is going around the merchant rondel, which will allow you to send your ships out around the Mediterranean. And your final worker is going around the poem rondel, where you are inscribing poems using these resources, reactivating poems that you've already written, and perhaps getting some money for having written your poems.
Yes, the magic spells that you put onto the building that will get you minor bonuses. I don't know. It's very boring magic, isn't it?
Well, I like the poem.
I like the
part
poems
of the theme
too.
here,
Yeah.
But this is a straight up heavy Euro game, and if you don't like modern straight up heavy Euro games, then you can skip to the later part of this episode right now.
Or if you like to hear us trounce on certain things about heavy Euro games. I'll get back into the theming in a bit. I think there could have been more theming here, but that's a specific complaint I'll get to in a moment.
Before we get to that, let's talk about how this works and exactly what you're doing and how these actions play out in the game. When you build something, whether it's a building or a poem, one of the interesting things in this game is that you can spend a variable amount of resources. You generally have to spend at least 1 resource, but you can spend more resources if you've collected them, which gives you additional victory points for having done this, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing at play here. another thing at play is that when you build one of the buildings, whether it's a minor construction or a major construction, you will get some associated benefit that often lets you take some other action, like get some money or take one of the other actions in the game, maybe doing some shipping perhaps, like that. So there's
it's possible that
chain.
it will focus into endgame points or end-of-round bonuses as well.
Right, exactly. Also, the poems that you inscribe are of three categories. One gives you ongoing benefits, like income. Another gives you an immediate big benefit, and another is an endgame scoring poem, right? There are also a bunch of things laid out which are like incentives for this game for scoring. So there will be end-of-round scoring basically at the ends of like rounds 1, 3, and 5, and they carry over, so the one that happens in round 1 also happens at the end of rounds 3 and 5 as well. There's also, in the shipping area in the Mediterranean, there's additional endgame points depending on what goals you fulfill shipping. And when you're shipping, you're moving ships and connecting them to places you've been before, usually, because that's the way that saves the most money in shipping them. And then there's also, besides putting out a new ship, there's a consolidate action where you move the ship from the left to the right part of the city, which then either gives you, again, some immediate big benefit or some ongoing income. There's also, when you construct, another option you have on that outer rondel is to expand your warehouse and give you more places to keep goods. And this is important because it's very tight in terms of how many goods you can have. Now, some of them are these building materials for poems and constructions, and some of them are raw materials, which are what actually allow you to move your ships. They actually have to take a finished product. And then there's certain actions which can turn those raw materials into finished products, which you can then use to ship to different places. But between those finished goods and those materials used to make the poems and the buildings, it can be tight in your warehouse. So maybe if you get a new warehouse space, you have more spaces to put goods. Or maybe you just get some special bonuses from that new warehouse space. I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place about all this path.
But the game.
I think, what?
So is the game. So
is the game, exactly.
One was
doing
with
this
the other, so.
I'm doing this deliberately.
Yeah.
And there's only 5 rounds, so there's really 20 actions in the game. Your 4 workers
Are
going
there,
around
or are there
rondels.
6? Wait, I'm confused. There's 6 on the board. Huh. That's confusing.
Yes, because you start your thing in the 1 space and move it to the 6 space. So 6 minus 1 equals 5. But,
that's so intuitive.
Perhaps not the greatest choice, but not what I would call a major issue with this game.
One of about a dozen small but quite impactful production choices. Let's talk about the gameplay.
Production choices. Are you referring perhaps to the unreadable font on the cards?
Is it English? Is it written in Arabic? I don't know. I really am not sure. Also, wait. I'm reading this card. Oh, wait, it's in Spanish. No wonder I can't read it. Not only does it look like Arabic, it's literally in another language.
Well, Pat's talking about the fact that actually quite nicely they include both English and Spanish cards. But if you're not careful and don't separate out the Spanish cards, you may be very confused.
Yeah, it was nice to turn to my playing partner Giannis and say, hey, we could play this in Spanish if you'd like, but I'm glad we didn't because some of those rules are very specific. But yeah, basically it's unreadable unless that card is directly in front of you under your nose. If it's upside down and if somebody's playing on the other side of the massive board, they are not going to be able to read that unless they pick it up.
And maybe not even that.
Maybe not.
It's this sort of old-timey, sort of Arabic-looking font that says, you get, at the end of the game, you'll get this many victory points for doing these XYZ things. But you have to squint at it carefully to see what it's done, and that's true of many of the cards
Can I
in this
take
game.
you through a brief sojourn into production hell? I swear there's only about 4 levels of this hell.
Sure.
Okay, the rule book, it's as big as the box, and it's difficult to learn from, which means, terrible kerning of words, rows of words so long that your eyes get tired reading them, and it feels to translate the text, so it's unclear. And it's one of those games that starts with concept first, and then introduces the mechanisms afterwards. And I don't think those work well because you are gleaning all of this information and then you're trying to fit very specific pieces into what you've already gleaned. And it took me 2 attempts at reading the book and a solo play to learn the game. And I was still getting small but important rules wrong during my in-person plays. Like, there are many role cases that are unclear and are only clarified by close reading of the text. For example, the book never explicitly says that you can't take 0 steps around the rondel. Rather, it says that a player will move around the rondel. in bold, will. And you have to take, not in bold, actually. I'm bolding it. And you have to take the second mental step to understand that means one needs to move. And then the small buildings, they have icons on them that like wood and marble that are never even mentioned in the rulebook. They're never explained. And one must infer that they are a bonus. And that's just the start of it. The player aid, it functions as an index with page references instead of shorthand rules. Page references, mind you, back to the bad rulebook. And then,
by the way, I've got one for you.
Yes.
Minor actions, which are, by the way, used to pick up the raw materials that you then turn into the processed goods, which you use for your ships,
yes.
right? Minor actions, those raw materials sit next to other action spaces on the rondel, and you can pay money or sometimes get them for free if you take the action next to that spot on the rondel. But in the rule book, in the minor action section, it doesn't actually say when you can take a minor action.
No, it doesn't.
That's in a completely separate part in the rule book. Maybe consider having when you can take a minor action actually in the section of the rulebook which discusses the minor actions.
Do you take the minor action instead of the main action? I don't know. I'm guessing you take them at the same time, and you're allowed to take both, but that was a guess.
Yes, exactly. So for me to learn this game, I had to watch a playthrough, read the rules, watch another playthrough, read the rules again.
Yes.
That's how that works.
I tried to read this by my bedside, and it sat half open for a week before I finally got through it. Mind you, on top of that, the board is 50% larger than it needs to be. They made 2 different locations and rule shorthands for Era 1 and Era 2 building tiles, even though they are never on the board simultaneously, and they have the same placement rules and the same number of tiles. There is no need for that redundancy. And then the shipboard's rules.
By the way, quick insert. I'll let you go back to the rant in a second. I like the board. I like having a huge board, and I like the look of the board. Graphically, while it is beige, I think it looks pretty cool. Go on.
I like the main rondel. I think everything else is redundant and a bit unclear, and the symbology grates on me a bit, especially because there's inconsistencies in the rules. Okay, this thing grabbed from the board, this card, you cannot replenish it. This one, however, you pay a coin and you change all of them. Okay, why that change? Why that small different caveat between those two? And then the ship place, the Mediterranean board, the board's routes, they are unclear, unintuitive. In my last game, 2 out of 3 players, they were unable to maximize their ship goal because they placed ships thinking that 2 adjacent cities right next to each other connected. But no, they didn't connect. Why didn't they connect? Because the game said so. Okay. But the biggest sin is one I've already mentioned. There are 5 rounds in the game, but the game board shows 6. And in my last game, everyone knew at the start of the game that there were 5 rounds, but intuitively, they planned for 6 based on the round marker. It is only a small end of game icon that suggests that it is not a real round. It says 6 rounds on the board. I don't care what anyone says. That's very confusing, and people were not able to enact their final strategies because of it.
So we've discussed and ranted about some production miscues and the difficulties of learning this game and kind of getting it in there. However, people who love heavy Euro games will be, I think, are used to some of these things, and if the game is good, I think we'll be able to move past some of them.
Okay.
I'm not defending them.
Is the game
I'm
good?
just saying that the people who this game is for, may be able to work through this stuff. There is a game there, and even an interesting game once you get through all this.
I agree.
Right?
It's a lot to get through. Is it worth it to get through it? That's my question. Because the core gameplay for me, it is good. I like it. It is a resource desert, and you're meant to build a castle. You're always limited in money, which you need for taking the actions you really want, as well as buying poems and ships. And then you're also limited in resources since they're hard to get. They're also hard to store since they sit on storage depots that have limited space. You're often deciding whether to play more of these resources, since the more you pay, the more points you get. But if you have no resources, then you aren't able to take certain actions at all. So it's early play gain versus late play loss, and that's a great tension. How do you sequence that? And then you're trying to, on top of that, sequence the best course of played resources, the best course of played action across your 4 workers, so that you can efficiently continue to take actions and not waste turns. But then one person comes in, and in this high-stakes play of sequencing of actions, where you're often on the knife edge of resources and coins, one anticipated step by your opponent will ruin your equation, and that's a really fun knife edge to be on.
Yeah, and a couple of the things that I like here are things that maybe we haven't even fully mentioned. For one thing, the rondel play works well. You just talked about money being tight. It's tight because to move more than 2 spaces on the rondel, you have to spend 1 coin per space you move, and for every opposing worker already in that space, you have to spend a coin as well. This is standard stuff with rondels, but it works well here to be the tight sort of game we're talking about. Also, I don't mind that there's this extra resource besides victory points called pariah points. It's a little, again, one of these rules confusions at first, but then you realize it's a resource that you pay the, basically, I guess, the Christian rulers, because you're this Muslim nobles working in Spain under Christian rulers, and you've got to pay tribute to them, right?
Wow, that is some great headcanon. That's amazing that you're able to come up with all of that.
Well, it's it's something thematically I like, but what it means is you have to pay this resource at the end of the turn. Again, we've seen this where there's some overarching ruler who demands something at the end of the turn. We've seen this in Simone Luciani's game in the Emperor's Track in Grand Austria Hotel, or I call it the Inquisition Track, not the right name, in Lorenzo Il Magnifico.
Yeah.
If you don't pay it, you've got to pay in victory points, and moreover, it's actually a way of determining turn order, and I think it's a pretty original turn order mechanism. I mean, again, we have seen it before, but I like whoever has the most of X resource is first player. It's something you can work towards that's not just arbitrary and you can just grab first player.
Yeah, my thing with these end of round negatives, like, in essence, they're a bad feel, right? Because it's taking away something from you or threatening to. This one is implemented well because you can establish bonuses. I've seen someone who got a card that said, okay, pay 2 less pariahs, and they were able to establish turn order and be first in turn order basically the entire game, and they were able to use it well. But it's generally not a good feel. I understand that in a resource-intensive, very resource-tight game, to tighten the knot that much more, makes it that much tighter. Yes, it's a good version of that. I generally don't like them, but it's a good version of it.
Okay, here's a neutral point I've got in how all this works. And I say neutral because I think some people are going to like this and some people aren't. I'm actually more on the sort of aren't end of this. By splitting the actions into these 3 rondels, the game forces you to diversify and not specialize, because you only have 1 poem worker on that rondel. You can't use all your workers to go do poems and pay a bunch more money to do that or something. You only got 1 worker there. Now, you do get bonus actions when you build these constructions and do other things, maybe consolidate in the cities to get a special action to do that. And one of the important things in this game is being able to get these extra actions to do things more than one, maybe write more than 1 poem.
Normally you can only do 1 poem or 1 ship action, but building something will give you a bonus version of it. Great.
But it's not like you can just do that thing. The thing has to be available and you have to build the right thing. So some people may not like the restriction of, like, you know what? You're going to be doing some shipping because you got a shipping worker over there and that's all they can do, right? They may want to specialize more. And this game says, no, you must engage in all the parts of the game.
Yeah, like the sequencing, it feels good to pull off. Like the game is so tight, so to be able to fly above the rondel and fly above the resources and enact a sequence of actions, like a build action of a major building that also gives you a ship action, and that shipping bonus is an automatic trade route consolidation action of a ship that you already have down, and that gives you another ship action, and you had just the right number of coins to carry it all out. That feels great. It is hard to pull off, and it lets you come over this inefficiency of the gameplay. However, this feeling of racing towards those bonuses, it often felt like it didn't feel alive to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, another person got to that ship building before me, and then I wasn't able to take it. And that sucked because I wanted to do it, but it didn't feel intentional. It just felt like it happened because they wanted it, not because they were interacting with me. It feels kind of dead.
There's a lot of unintentional screwage in this game, one could say.
Yes, and so the game is limiting in a way by the other players that feels unintentional, and although it is interactive, it does not feel interactive.
I do like the way the different parts of the game affect each other, again, with those cross bonuses and such, and when you ship, you get something in some other area.
Well, and that's why I think the ship actions and the poem actions, they're the most interesting and most immediately satisfying, because you can specialize a little bit in income as far as ships, and then you can specialize with special player powers with your poems. I think, and then you can plan on an end game major poem to go after. I think that's fun, and that keeps me engaged during the entire game. It makes me feel special during the game. It makes me feel powerful while gliding through this resource desert of the Rondel.
You asked, Pat, whether all the work to play this game is worth it. Mm-hmm. And I would kind of answer that two ways. I'm going to be wishy-washy on this. If, like, do you get a payoff of fun in playing this game? I think you do. I think there is fun to be had here, and I think there are heavy Eurogame players who will really like what's going on here. Is it worth it in comparison to other games that you might be playing in the same genre? I'm not so sure about that.
Right. I can play Concordia, which is a simple game that has similar levels of core mechanisms, but glides so smoothly compared to the ka-chunk rejiggering of Sabika and lack of smoothness, the many minor rules that introduce speed bumps along the way to smooth gameplay. And I question why it's complex. I think there's heavy games that are complex because the core mechanisms are complex and interesting, and then there are heavy games that are complex because the core concept is exceedingly simple, but the many minor variations on the rules make it complicated.
Well, and this is where I have an issue with the game, which is not just the rule stuff or the production stuff adding hurdles, but with the mechanisms themselves. I think there are too many mechanisms in these games, and that's something people that are not me often say. Mm-hmm. I like my heavy Euro games, and I think a heavy Euro game with a ton of mechanisms can be great. Here's what I mean by too many mechanisms. There are things that are kind of redundant in this game that I don't think need to be there. Why, Pat, do there need to be both major and minor constructions?
I don't know.
Answer me that. And
why when you take a supply depot, you can only take it from the side that the action's on? Why have that wrinkle of the rule?
I don't know. So coming back to this thing about major and minor constructions, they have different rules mechanisms that you have to learn.
Right.
In the minor constructions, you're chaining these cards together to get certain things, but in the end, what you get is this bonus, which allows you maybe to get some coins or maybe to inscribe a poem or something like that. When you have a major construction, you take the major construction, put it in front of you, and it gives this bonus, like maybe inscribing a poem or shipping or something. So if these things are doing similar things, why are you doing two things that are having similar results with different mechanisms to get there?
Also, why are their resource loads slightly different? Okay, play a minor building. All right, I'll pay 1 of 3 resources and maybe 2 other resources. Okay, that's the core mechanism of the game. Seems simple enough. Okay, play a major building. Okay, same thing, but wait, 1 of the resources has to be gypsum. Okay, why?
It's like you've added this thing that the I'm going to use that word minor. The minor differences between major and minor constructions are not worth the extra rules overhead and components.
It's all a bit fussy. There's these rules and fences that feel like they are there for rules and fences' sake.
That's an example that just feels like bloat to me.
And I think in a different game, and I've seen many of these heavy Euros that do this. Perseverance tries to do this and does it better than Sabika. I don't think it's great, but that dinosaur game at least has theming to it. These caveats, they'd be one thing if they were carried through by careful and thorough theming, so that you knew why there was major and minor buildings and there was a reason for it and they were distinct and different in feeling. But as they are, they feel like arbitrary fencing, arbitrary minor differences between what's effectively the same thing with no thematic justification whatsoever.
And I feel this way even with the overarching 3 rondels. I feel like we're doing 3 rondels because somebody said, wouldn't it be cool to have a game with 3 rondels? If you had all the actions on 1 or 2 rondels, it would work fine and give probably more flexibility and more player choice in there.
Yeah.
Here's another example, the warehouse section of the game, where you're expanding your warehouse. Now, other games have this where you're expanding. There's a limitation to how many goods you can hold, and you can expand that ability. Except this is a whole action section of the game around the warehouse, and it's not just that you expand the warehouse, but you get points and special abilities when you buy a new section of your warehouse. And when you take the warehouse action, instead of getting a new piece, you can activate one of those old special abilities or play over the old special ability to put a new thing in your warehouse. And I'm like, do we need all this about the warehouse?
It's like
we need a whole section of the game about warehousing? This game does not need that.
Yeah, it's like they took a below deck Star Trek character and said, "Okay, this red shirt, let's build out an entire family. Oh, he's got a Klingon mom and Bajoran dad. That's interesting. Okay, now he's a character because we gave him an interesting backstory, even though he as in one character is not that interesting. It's justifying things with like unnecessary complications that feel like they don't need justification. Maybe you should have just trimmed them out of the game.
Exactly. Or the shipping aspect of the game. Do we need both a shipping section of the game where you export the good and a consolidation section? So the way it works is when you ship, you get an instant bonus. And then when you consolidate, move the ship from the left to the right part of the city, you get either a bigger instant bonus or an ongoing income. Here's an idea. Why not when you ship to the city, you just get either an instant bonus or ongoing income? Why do we have this extra consolidation step? It seems like it's because we want more actions to pad out the shipping rondelle, right? But again, if you didn't have 3 rondelles, you wouldn't need to pad this all out. This could have been a tight, streamlined game. It's just that every part of the game seems like it's got more actions, things going on than need be.
I think that there's a good medium weight game here that's waiting to be clawed out of the stone, chipped from the marble. And if you claw away the bad production choices, if you claw away these caveats in between similar actions and get rid of the redundancies, I think you have a really solid rondelle, resource desert, resource tight, medium weight board game that I would really enjoy. But as it is with Sabika, you have to really enjoy inefficiency, resource deserts, and getting screwed over unintentionally by the other players. That's all great. But you have to get to these rare exceptional bonuses, bonus-fueled moments. In order to get all that mile-high feeling, you first have to get through this mile-high mountain of crap to get a, somewhat unsublime high. It's the highs are not that high, and you really have to climb through a mountain of garbage to get there.
I like it more than you do. I think I have fun playing this game, and if you've never played a chunky Euro game before and you like chunky Euro games, you might say, wow, this is really fun, and there's a lot of fun stuff underneath all this. And there is fun stuff there, and I hate to do this. It's just that compared to other games, it's more work for the amount of fun than you get from some other games that I like, and I'm kind of just impatient with a game that's clunkier than it needs to be. I enjoyed my plays of it once I got through the stuff. I mean, there is some combo-rific clever stuff. There are clever ways the different pieces fit together. And I thought the solo game was fairly well designed. I like the fact that it's an AI, but a super simple one.
Yeah. And honestly, it mostly feels like the multiplayer. I don't know if you felt like you had a chance to play the multiplayer, but the only thing that's different is really knowing the intentions as far as what poems your opponent may want to get and the cleverness by which they enact strategies and get those bonuses.
Yeah, it has it, and it has this simple system of not scoring as complicated as players do, so it makes it really simple just to take their action, move their worker around, and do the thing. The only thing that I didn't like about it is that you don't use all the cards that you play for the AI in every game. Some of them are used in one game and others not used in another. And some of the cards that you play might end up scoring the AI 10 points, while another card might score them 1 point, which means the AI score can really vary quite a bit.
Yeah.
Just based on which cards you happen to flip in that game. It's funny, like the first game I played, I doubled the AI score, and then in the second game I lost badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't think it was because I was playing better or worse. So part of that is the AI scored drastically higher in the second game.
Maybe because he started using the Spanish rules and didn't realize it.
Well, it was also, you talked about the incidental blocking also, the incidental screwage we mentioned here. In the first game, the AI magically stayed out of my way whenever I wanted it to, and in the second game, the AI took everything I wanted on every turn. So that didn't feel satisfying. The flow of the AI felt very satisfying. Yeah. Like, I almost would want to play it that way going forward, just because then I'm not waiting for other people's turns, and I like it when I'm doing 90% of the turns and only 10% of my time is spent on the AI's turn, and that is present, so I think that works.
So, Sabika, I think Sabika could have gone to CrossFit and shed some pounds, tightened up, got really comfortable with his own weight. Thank you. That's the episode title. Should we move on?
I do want to work that into the title now. That's good. That's great. So let's move on to games that should have been an email, or if you don't like Pat's sort of desperately trying to use a meme, overcomplicated games.
Thanks. Or in Sabika's case, heavy games that could have been medium games.
Yeah, pick the title you like the best.
Yeah, okay. I mean, back to Sabika, right back to it. Their core resource tension is great, but due to the complications of the actions, it is juiced up to a difficult game. I mean, if we could clarify the gameplay and make mechanisms more universal, it would be a really smooth experience. The weight comes from the unintuitive nature of the rules and the clunky production choices. If you make some of these rules more uniform, add out the funky arbitrary fences, you have a much smoother gameplay experience in a lighter game. Like Perseverance, another game that does this, the dinosaur game, it suffers the same fate. They have exceptionally complex sub-mechanisms within areas of the game, while the primary mechanism, it's enjoyable and reasonable. So these games that they had some clarifications of in a couple of different ways, these games could have been simpler, smoother games, perhaps more enjoyable to your taste. I mean, some people might like the clunky, unintuitive nature, and I'd argue that there's some games that are complex for complexity's sake, and that's Lacerda's games, and I like those, but I'm talking about games that, frankly, could be sharper, cleaner, fitter games.
Yeah, well, we can just then move past I could have done 80% of this episode and just said Lacerda games.
I know. That's why I threw it out there.
And you know my opinion that you're struggling with the mechanisms more than you are making what you want to have happen in his games, which is why they're not to my taste.
Sometimes the person who wins is the person who understands the unintuitive intricacies and actions of the mechanisms of his games most quickly. I understand that that's a reasonable complaint.
And understanding the mechanisms is a prerequisite to winning any game, but it's the unintuitive there that I tend not to like. It's when it's hard to grok and somebody makes a big mistake just because they didn't really understand how that mechanism works.
Right.
Now, I understand if you play a lot of Lacerda games and you play them over and over, it becomes more transparent.
Yeah. And in many of his games, there is a depth to that mastery and the intricacies between those mechanisms. But in some of his games, honestly, yeah, it's whoever groks it first.
One reason I gravitate towards Euro games, however, than instead of American-style games, is that I don't like in many American-style games the extra rules for rules' sake, or actually, to be fair, rules for theme's sake. The chrome of American-style games to make it seem cooler and more thematic can add a lot of rule bloat that I'm just not that interested in.
I said chrome so many times during War of the Ring, the card game, that Tina said she was going to tape my mouth shut. There's a decent amount of chrome in that game.
Right. I want to give an example of sometimes when a game seems overcomplicated, it's also just you like something or you don't like something, right?
Yeah.
One of the games we disagreed most on this channel, I'm going to say, this might be the perfect example of a game we disagreed. What?
Woodcraft?
Woodcraft, yeah, but I'm going to go back. And I can see why people liked Woodcraft, even though it wasn't for me.
Yeah, I'll come back.
I'm going to talk about a game that you really liked that I really hated. Tekhenu, Obelisk of the Sun.
Yes. Yeah, the base mechanisms are clunky and difficult, and then the sub-mechanisms are fun and interesting. It's like the flipped-out version of Sabika.
Exactly. This is a game where I thought was unsalvageable for me because I liked the peripheral mechanisms in Tekhenu, but it was the core mechanism of the game that I thought was completely unnecessary, and that's kind of hard to come back from.
Yeah.
And so it's a great thematic idea in Tekhenu. You have this moving obelisk, which is throwing this shadow, and so at some points of the action selection area are in light, some are in shadow, and some are sort of in twilight, right? Mm-hmm. And this affects both what actions you can take and then a little bit of point scoring around where those the dice are that you can take as well, depending on what type they are, right? And I just found that it was really hard to predict what actions you could actually take. It had the feeling of effective randomness, like sometimes you just can't take certain actions. And I didn't have the feeling people were like planning out, aha, my clever planning is so I can do this, because over the long haul, it's quite hard to predict. And I didn't feel like the different points you scored was really worth it. So I just struggled with and didn't like the core action mechanism of that game. I felt like the beating heart of that game was making things more difficult than me. And why weren't we just grabbing dice without any of this light and shadow?
The core mechanism to reach the dopamine-fueled mini games was fairly clunky. I mean, I liked it reasonably, or I could accept it, but it was fairly clunky, and if that had been, clarified quite a bit, then I think that game could have been simpler and more enjoyable and ultimately a better game. I do agree with you.
Is there any? Can you think of a game where it's the core mechanism for you was the thing that was too much?
Not. I think Tekhenu is a good example. Generally, the core mechanism is the right thing for me, right? And it's the extraneous stuff that's the difficulty. I can't think of one that answers your question, but can think of one that doesn't answer your question, and that's Woodcraft. Because the core mechanism of it is the woodcutting is exceptionally good. And if you strip away many of the mechanisms, you still have the same great game that's clarified and simpler and is less heavy. I think there is a way
that's an example of where the side mechanisms were my issue. And
Right.
not even that it was too complicated.
It's just a little too much. Like, if you strip away some of these mechanisms, I think you can knock the complexity rating down from 3.85 to 3.25 while still maintaining the core gameplay of purchasing dice and manipulating them with your woodshop components to glue them together or add 1 pip value, and with the dual drafting maintained. But there's redundant actions in that game. Like, if you stripped away the fact that there are 2 different ways of buying dice, and you get rid of the growth action that gives you another way of upgrading dice that I've never used. I've used it once, but I rarely use it. And then the odd attic space where you throw random tools just as another place to do things.
Yeah, the attic space.
It's useless. You don't need it. I mean, it's there, but it's not part of the game, right? And then the tacked-on marketing action that strips you of coins to basically balance out the market when they could have just rebalanced the core cost of the game. I think if you took all of that out, you would have a tighter, more interesting medium weight game. I do think Woodcraft could have been a better game. I'm trying to think of other games that, Golem is kind of answering your question. I think Golem had, which is a Simone Luciani game. I forget who the co-designer is, but that was a game that had an interesting but inconsistent primary mechanism, and then the 3 subcategories of running your golem and building out I forget what they're called, but they were like poems or books, and then building out your kind of laboratory. I thought all of those actions individually were really interesting, but then the kind of clunkiness of the marbles wasn't that great. But the mini games were fantastic. It wasn't that great because the primary core mechanisms were inconsistent.
I agree. That's a great example. The marbles both were kind of random, clunky to use production wise, didn't create interesting choices. Just kind of felt you were arbitrarily screwed from doing things sometimes. But and then the other things like running the golems up was really cool, or building out your books was really cool. Yeah.
So definitely there could be some clarification in Golem that I think would have made it go from a good but inconsistent game to a game that I'd want to play all the time.
It's perhaps worth mentioning some counterexamples, games that have a million things going on and they all need to be there and it all works. And a couple games I thought of in those regards are one at Barrage, which, it's got a million things going on, but they all need to be, like, you can't cut the water and the water flow. I mean, that's the beating heart of that game and what makes it tense and interesting.
I tried to put Barrage on this list, Tony, and I examined it and I tried to cut it, but I couldn't cut anything. It all needs to be there.
All the pieces actually come together. Like the massive worker placement adds to the tension, right? Your rondel of resources makes it so you can't just do things when you want. If you could just do things exactly when you wanted to do them, build exactly when you wanted to build, then there wouldn't be that tension on the board with the water flow. It would be just really predictable about who would do what, right?
Yeah.
You need all those working parts coming together. Another example, which also has a ton of workers, is A Feast for Odin, right? You need all the different paths, the different worker placement paths to generate those polyomino pieces. Otherwise, you just have a simple polyomino game.
Right. This is true.
And also that game, it gets a reputation as a super complicated game because of the many worker placement spots. But really, it's about you do worker placement actions to get polyominoes, and then you place the polyomino pieces, and that's 90% of the game.
Yeah, it's actually just very simple, the individual component pieces. It's just, as a sum, it's a lot.
Yeah, there's just a lot of actions, but they all make sense, and they're all somewhat different ways to engage with the core polyomino puzzle of the game, right?
Yeah. So a slightly different idea of this. There are some games that are made harder purposefully by the designers when they could be easier, just so that you have to use that much more brain power. And I'm thinking Splatter's Horseless Carriage, this game which is about making a car factory. And the game, you lay out your factory and you do careful planning of your factory. And if you misplan, then your entire system is screwed up and you can't meet the demands that are set by you and the other players, the market demands. But one key thing in this game is that at the end of one of your turns, like 4/6 of the way through a round, you have to expand your factory, and you have a full set of actions, like 2 more actions that are very important in between that and when you have to lay out tiles onto that factory expansion. So you're sitting there, you're doing like more things, and you're just growing more and more concerned and regretful about where you put your factory expansion, as you realize that what you planned is not viable anymore, or what you thought could be possible is just not possible because you failed in your plans in the next 2 actions. And it is just so mean. It forces you to hold so many possibilities in your head to have that many things go on between when you expand your factory and when you can actually put tiles down on that expansion. It would just be so much smoother if the designers had put that factory expansion at the start of your turn and allowed you to expand your factory from there on, because there's a lot of things that happen in between due to the other player's actions that feel arbitrary or that you didn't consider because you didn't use your entire brain in that moment, that make you feel extremely screwed and regretful.
By the way, some listeners may not know this, but fun fact, splotter is actually one of those German compound words that means mean and ugly, which means vicious gameplay and unattractive production.
I didn't know that.
They picked that compound word to convey both of those elements about the games.
Resident German expert. I trust you inherently and will never question what you just said.
I've got one more twist on this overcomplicated games thing, which isn't really about the difference between a medium and heavyweight game, and that we might not think of. But sometimes relatively light games, for me, can be overcomplicated. And I'm specifically thinking of games which should have just been simple light games, but got gamerized into something a little heavier than it needed to be. You take some simple idea and then you gamerize it by throwing in some gamery rules around it, which can sometimes work. But other times it's like, why did we need this? The simple classic version of this was better. I think this is going to be a controversial example in this category, because it's a game that was very well received, and I don't think is a bad game. In fact, it's the John Clare game that I like probably the most, and that's Ready, Set, Bet, which is this really nice horse racing game where players are betting in real time on these on how the horses are going to do, and the sort of the conductor of the game is rolling the horse dice to see which horses move forward, and you're trying to get your bets out before other people do, depending on what you see on the board. You rush to get that bet in, and there's only a limited number of betting spots, and if you bet too early, then you have committed to a horse which may not be doing well. But if you bet too late, somebody's going to have beaten you to that betting spot, right? That's a really nice central core tension. However, they throw in these special power cards that come out every round, and one of them is okay, but then there's one every round. So you have all these special power cards floating around the game that bog the game down, and especially with people. This is a great game to play with people who are not gamers, but you don't want them to get bogged down squinting at these special power cards, and you don't want the action to slow down in a fast horse racing game. And I feel like that one thing shouldn't have been there.
Sure, something that they added that actively gets in the way of the core gameplay. Yeah,
exactly. And it's not a heavy game. And so the overcomplication can occur even in light games, I guess, is the point I want to make.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm spent, Tony. Do you have anything else?
No, except that because it showed up in the mail, in 2 weeks we will probably be reviewing Shake That City.
I'm into it. Let's get some plays in. In the meantime, check out TwoWoodForAWheat's Discord in the show notes. Also, we're on TwoWoodForAWheat@gmail.com. If you want to send us any notes or clarifications, please shoot us some reviews on Apple Podcasts. We love to see them. And also check us out on TwoWoodForAWheat.com. Looking forward to Shake That City. I'm going to sell off Sabika, goodbye, and get to some more medium weight games, Tony. Looking forward to those.
Okay. Yeah, it's funny. I think part of the incentive for me in this topic is as I get older, my brain does not want to do heavy rules as much.
I think that's just like post-COVID, man. I think that's where we're at. I'm in the same place.
It's not that I have to play light games. I don't find it necessarily a heavy game exhausting and soul-sucking. It's learning a heavy game I find exhausting and soul-sucking.
Yep, it's not worth it. Just ain't
anyway,
worth it.
See you in 2 weeks, folks.
Bye, guys. Stay frosty. Two Wood for a Wheat is recorded across the airwaves. in Bear Creek, Pennsylvania, and Chicago, Illinois, were produced by Tony Faber and edited by Patrick Flannery. Follow us on Instagram at TWFAW and find more episodes and blog posts at TwoWoodForAWheat.com.
Hate it when my seat just slowly sinks like a millimeter every 10 seconds.
I think that might just be osteoporosis. Also,
Yes.
please drink more water. You sound like you're slugging back entire bottles of yogurt and kefir. I was going to say, are you neurolinked? Are you one of the early adopters and you've got, a little Neuralink chip in your brain? You know what worries me about Neuralink? The idea that I can get direct beaming of advertisements into my brain. I don't want that. I don't want to wake up and have Folgers coffee, advertised to me directly into my brain as soon as I see the first rays of sunshine. Like, imagine that as an alarm clock. Your brain
So it's
telling
not
you to
about
go
a
drink
pernicious
Folgers
AI.
coffee.
It's not about a pernicious AI controlling your actions. It's just avoiding advertisement.
Yeah, but by virtue of subconscious directions, it is controlling my actions. Wow, I hear a cell phone. After
No,
all
that's
the
my
Discord
cell
stuff,
phone.
we have a
I think
friggin'
it's
cell
my
phone.
cell phone Discord.
You said that there was no cell phone in the room.
I forgot that was there.
You
Okay,
forgot
hold
the
on.
cell phone in the room.
I've turned it off.
It's off.
I've turned
Thank
it
you.
off.
Oh, these little moments of direct conflict really help with the editing process.